Okay. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Thanks for picking through the rubble again to be here. Yeah, there's a circuitous route set up, so there's a little less rubble picking. So tonight we're going to get started on the prophets, which means eventually, after my typical super long introduction, we're going to get into the book of Hosea. So, the book of Hosea is the next book, but there's going to be a fair amount of introduction beforehand. If you can't see all the stuff I've scrawled in foreign languages on the chalkboard, don't worry too much about it. I'm going to talk through it, and mainly this was just because I'm still paying off the student loans behind these languages. And so I'm going to kind of use them just on principle. So tonight we're going to, as I said, we're moving into sort of the prophets proper. One of the divisions of the Old Testament, as we've talked about, is the prophets. Often in the New Testament we see it referred to the law and the prophets. That's the way of referring to the Old Testament. It's now traditional for Jewish folks, as we've said before, to refer to the Hebrew Bible as the Tanakh, which the T is for Torah, the N is for Navi'im, which is the prophets, and then the K is for Ketuvim, which is the writings. So those are the two ways that typically the Old Testament's broken up in Jewish circles, is either the law and the prophets or the law, the prophets, and the writings. In Christian circles, especially once you get into Protestant circles, we subdivided it more in terms of talking about what genre of literature it is. So, for example, all those books we read after we finished the Torah, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles, those are all considered in the Hebrew reckoning prophets. They're usually referred to as the former prophets. Whereas what we're about to start reading now, the books actually written by or containing the prophecies of prophets, are referred to as the latter prophets. Okay. A lot of times,
Unorthodox time. I'm early.
So,
Let me sit in back.
So,
now that you're Orthodox.
No, I still have bad habits.
so,
Well, you got our time out right off the bat.
So, a lot of times in English circles particularly, you'll hear those books that I just mentioned, Joshua, Judges, Ruth, 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings. Those will be referred to as the historical books. And then these that we're about to read will be referred to as the prophets. So, basically in the Jewish reckoning, those are books that are stories about the prophets, right? We read the stories of Elijah and Elisha and Samuel, Nathan, right, about these prophets. And then these are the prophetic writings, so former prophets, latter prophets. If you're looking at it by genre, by type of literature, those are historical books telling stories. These are recording somebody's words. So, now that begs the question, of course, what is a prophet? Right? What does prophet mean? And there are a couple of misconceptions we have to get out of our heads right away, because the two most common ways we use the word prophet today in English are incorrect in terms of the prophets of the Old Testament. Probably the most common way we use the word prophet today in the English language is to refer to someone who predicts the future. Right? You say they were prophetic because they predicted something that was going to happen, whether it be in the economy or, whatever. That is nothing to do with being a prophet in the Old Testament sense, predicting the future. The other common usage that we have for prophet is we refer to somebody as a prophet who comes and brings some kind of new revelation from God. Right? This is the prophet in the Joseph Smith or Muhammad or Ellen G. White sense. Right? That also has nothing to do with what it means to be a prophet in the Old Testament. So we have to kind of take those out of our heads. There are two words that are used for prophet in Hebrew and Aramaic. The older one, and the one that's used most commonly for prophets who aren't Israelite prophets, is roeh, which very literally means seer. It means someone who sees. So someone who sees things, someone who sees visions, someone who sees revelations, someone who sees something. The word that's used most commonly, as here, Navi'im, right, the prophets, is the word Navi. Word Navi. And the word Navi is derived from an older word, Nuv. Nuv means open. So, a prophet is someone who's open to something. You want to be very literal in that sense. So, when we talk about prophets, when we've been reading about when we read about the prophet Nathan and the prophet Samuel, Moses, and at the end of Deuteronomy when it says God's going to send a prophet like Moses, it's a Navi. It's a Navi. And what a Navi does, particularly in terms of how it's described there in Deuteronomy, the goal of a Navi is twofold. Number one, they represent God. And so the words they speak are God's words. And remember back in Deuteronomy, there's that important distinction that if someone says something, claims they're a prophet and says something, and it turns out they didn't get it from God, then you have to kill them. Right? So it's a high stakes game to show up and say you're a prophet. if you weren't legitimate. That's number one. And then number two is the prophet's job is to call the people back to the Torah. Right? To call the people back to God's revelation of himself. So it was not to show up and tell them something new. Guess what? I have the new thing. Forget the old thing. I have the new religion now. And it was not to tell them what was going to happen 3 weeks from now. In fact, again going back to Deuteronomy, remember God's very specific. He tells the people not to practice divination. Right? Don't go and do the practices that the other nations had where they would kill an animal and look at the color of its entrails and by that try and predict the future or throw bones or do all these things to predict the future. So don't do that. So I'm going to send a prophet. Right? The prophet will tell you what you need to do. And then if he's a true prophet, what's he telling you need to do? You need to follow the Torah. Right? Going back to what we were just talking about, the wisdom literature. He's going to try and put you on the right path, right, that leads to salvation. So he's going to be bringing you back to the old way of doing things. He's going to be calling you back, okay, not saying something new.
Now this is for the Old Testament because we're not Jews, right?
I'm getting there.
Oh, okay. Well, that's
Give me a minute.
okay.
You know how I like to ramble on.
Well,
Is a water winter, is that divination, or to me, because I had some great-great-grandparents that did that, I didn't think they were even that way.
Well, no, see, there's a lot
Because
of...
they walk around, I thought the earth was sort of
Yeah.
like that thing.
There's divination and there's divination. Right. I don't think every old Greek woman who reads tea leaves should be taken out and burnt as a witch, right? Okay, you know.
But they do it.
And I mean,
Coffee cut, a Turkish coffee.
yeah. You know, I read fortune cookies. You know? So there's levels, right? I mean, I'm certainly not going to judge someone and say they're going to hell because they did something like that. On the other hand, what we're saying when we say that something is sinful is ultimately that it's destructive. And what we're saying is destructive about divination is, and there are people who do this, if I base my whole life and all the decisions I make on what, say, my astrologer is telling me, right? Or what a psychic is telling me that the dead are telling him, or whatever, right? And that's how I make my decisions, and that's how I shape my life. I'm going to end up going down a bad road. Right? The point that's being made in Deuteronomy is that we need to shape our life around how God has taught us we need to live, right? Not around some predictions of the future. Because the idea is if you're living the way you ought to live, you don't have to worry about what's going to happen tomorrow. Right? Because even if you die tomorrow, you're living the way you're supposed to be living. You're okay. So that's the point that's being made. So, I mean, if somebody, you know, reads their horoscope in the paper and kind of chuckles at it, you know, I'm not, how dare you, right? That's penance, you know. But again, if it's a situation where you're really, you know, basing your life on the things these people are telling you, you know, you're following the teachings of some medium or something, that's where there's an issue, where it's crossed the line and becomes something unhealthy.
Question.
Yeah.
When the wise men come to Herod,
Mm-hmm.
okay, they have prophecies and they have things saying, this is where the child is to be born. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
Has nothing to do, if I understand correctly, nothing to do with Torah at that time.
Well, because they didn't have it.
Thank you. They didn't have it, okay? So when you also mentioned the name seer, which is to see into the future, am I correct in saying?
Well, not necessarily if you had to have visions.
Yes. The interesting thing that I think, the first statement I want to make is one really needs to know the word. Why? Because look what happened to Saul.
Right.
Did he not go to a psychic, if you will, a seer?
Yeah.
And he was
That's
told,
exactly who he went to.
and he said that he was told, please don't do this. Okay?
Right.
And where people can communicate with the dead and everything. So we think this is an old story, but today, if you take the Lord's words, they're relevant to the very actions of today. So therefore, how would you describe something when we look at prophecy, when we look at whatever you may want to call it, especially with the wise men traveling and saying, we've seen this star, here's what's in the writings about it. They go to Herod, and who does he go to? He goes, and Herod is not a Jew. You know.
Right. Yeah, he's an abbot.
And he goes to
We'll get
his
there. Yeah.
prophets, his seers, and they say, yes, it should be there. Now, is the same type of prediction in the Bible that there will be a star, there will be a sign in the heavens, that the coming of the Messiah?
Well, let me
Thank you.
starting with Saul. Saul is a good illustration of what I was just saying. Right? Saul's about to go and fight this battle.
Right.
Right? He knows, or he has an inkling that he's under God's judgment. Right? So this may not go well. But does he go and repent? Does he go and say, well, is this a battle that I should be fighting? You know, according to what is taught here in the Torah? Is this what I should be? No, he goes to a seer and says, you know, communicate with the dead to find out if I'm going to win the battle or not. Right? See, that's the problem. In terms of the wise men, I'll refer you to one of the Tropari, one of the hymns we sing at Christmas. That is that those who worship the stars were taught by a star to worship Christ. Right? So it doesn't endorse them worshiping the stars. Right? But God used that. God used that. And there's this idea that St. Justin Martyr, who lived in the 2nd century, he was a Palestinian in the 2nd century, he talked about the logos spermaticos, which I referred to before back in Proverbs. This idea that sort of just in the structure of creation, in the structure of the world, if you're a wise person and you observe the way the world and these things, you get pieces of the truth. Right, because it leads you back to the person who created it. Right, and so these other cultures, even though they didn't have the Torah, right, the wise people among them who could look at creation, they got these bits and pieces. And that's how he would talk about, for example, the story of the phoenix, right, who dies and then rises again. These things that you pick up, right, that those things are sort of out there, they're in the creation and they're intended. They're there to lead people to Christ ultimately, who's the fulfillment of all of those things. Right? So that's the...
Well, can I ask just one more sustainment?
Sure.
I need your opinions, okay?
Yeah.
There was the psychiatrist by the name of Speck who wrote The Spiritual Journey. And one of the things that he spoke about in his counseling sessions that he discovered from his patients was the unconscious of somebody actually guiding these people. And it's a type of book that's not necessarily a medical book, but a wonderful book to read because we are not alone, so to speak, even as individuals. And that's part of what he was saying. It's called the collective unconsciousness.
Yeah, that you got from Jung. Yeah.
Yeah, Jung comes up with that. Yeah. Can you explain the collective unconsciousness then? Because of Siri?
The idea that well, we have to sort of slight diversion, but I'll bring it back. the idea is that in terms of our mind, right? If I could draw a very bad, here's another one of my very bad drawings. This is an iceberg, okay? Right? Looks kind of like the shmoo, but anyway. This is an iceberg. You have the tip of the iceberg, right? Most of the iceberg's underwater. So the idea is that we have our conscious mind that's up above the water that we're aware of, where we're thinking. And then most of our mind is under the water. Most of our mind is unconscious. So there's all these things going on that we aren't consciously aware of. Right? And for Freud, we each have our own individual unconscious mind, meaning that all this stuff from back in our childhood and back in our past, times we've been hurt, times we've been happy, is all sort of brewing there under the surface, and it affects how we relate to things, but we don't understand why. So the idea of psychoanalysis for Freud is you try and bring this stuff up and become aware of it. Right? Jung's idea was that this unconscious mind is actually shared by sort of everyone. That there are, within human beings, there are certain images and certain ideas that are just sort of latently there with all human beings that we can all tap into. And so that's sort of the flip side of St. Justin Martyr's Logos Spermaticos, where for him it's out there in the world, in the created order. Right? And that's how Christ's parables work. He talks about things in the world as images of the kingdom of God. For Jung and the people following after him, it's internal. So that all of these myths and stories, the reason they have sort of similar motifs of death and resurrection and these kind of ideas is that that's sort of built into the human mind to reference things in those terms. right? But either way, it's a way of getting at the idea that Christ, the Word, the Logos, who created everything, is sort of imprinted in His creation, imprinted in us as individual human beings, imprinted in humanity as a whole, imprinted in the whole creation, is sort of its author.
Well,
And that these things, if we follow through to them, ultimately lead us to Christ.
right, and when we talk about prophets, I'm not so sure that all of us, every human being, is not imprinted, if we want to continue to use that term, with a conscience of right and wrong. Some may
Well, we're going to get there. See, you're jumping ahead of me. Okay, now I'm going to bring it back. Digression, now I brought it back. So, now remember, we've seen already at least one Navi who wasn't necessarily legit, and that was in the book of Numbers. That was Balaam. Remember Balaam? They show up and they hire him to go curse to curse Israel, and he goes and tries to curse Israel, and he blesses Israel. They go, they say, "Hey, what gives? We hired you to curse him. You go out there and bless him." He's like, "Oh, my bad." So he goes and he tries to do it again, and he blesses him again. And he can't bring himself to. So there were Navi, right? There were prophets of there were prophets of Baal, right? There were prophets of these other gods, right? So there were people who claimed. Now, obviously, they didn't have a relationship to the Torah, but they were representatives and claimed to speak for those other gods. Now, something interesting happens when the time comes to translate the Old Testament into Greek. Because the word that they choose to translate Navi into Greek is prophetis, which is where we get the word prophet. A prophet is just a transliteration of prophetis. It's prophetis in Greek, and then that gets translated into Latin as prophetus, and then just becomes prophet in English. And the reason that's interesting is that there are two words that you would normally use for a prophet in Greek. So, for example, if you read Oedipus, the king, right? There's the blind prophet Tiresias, and that's how it's translated as a prophet. The word there that's being translated as prophet in English is mentis. Greek word mentis. And mentis in Greek refers to someone who practices divination. Right? Someone who reads bird entrails or throws bones and predicts the future that way. Someone who practices divination. Okay. The other word, you usually get through Latin, gets translated as oracle. The most famous one being the oracle at Delphi. Right? And as we've talked about before, we mentioned those, that the Greek word is chrismos, and an oracle is someone who's actually possessed by, a human being who's possessed by the god or the spirit in question. Right? So they don't speak for the god. Like the oracle at Delphi didn't speak for Apollo. Apollo came and possessed her and spoke directly to people. Okay? So those are two words in Greek that usually get translated prophet and oracle when you're reading stuff in classical Greek. Not prophetis. Well, what does prophetis mean in Greek? Well, in Greek, before the Septuagint, it means an advocate. And yes, by advocate I mean basically lawyer. Right? Lawyer or advocate, legal representative. Okay. So when they translate it into Greek, they deliberately put even more distance. As I was saying, there's already trying to put a distance between this seer, this idea of divination, and what the prophets are doing. There's even more distance here. Right? Prophetis, now he's an advocate, he's a legal representative.
Of what?
For God.
Of God. Of God. So to put it in mob terms, it's like God's consigliere. Right? Shows up. He's the person who legally is going to represent God in this matter. Right?
And then he's going to tell you what's going to happen.
And so he speaks for
God.
Right? And he's a representative in that sense. So, again, not this concept of possession, right? And not this concept of divination and predicting the future, right? But this legal representative, again, connected to, because remember, Torah gets translated into Greek as nomos, which means roughly law, right? That's how it's usually translated in the New Testament, the law and the prophets, right? So you have law and you have a lawyer who comes and calls you back to, here's what the law says. Here's what the law says. He shows up representing his client, in this case God, and tells you, this is what the law says. Right? And this is connected to the word that's used in Hebrew for this kind of person in a secular setting, for a legal representative in a secular setting, is sheliach, which means a person who is sent. And the way sheliach is translated into Greek is apostolos, which is the word apostle in English. So, this word apostle, when we talk about the apostles, them being apostles in the New Testament, when St. Paul is claiming to be an apostle, right, included in that is this idea that they're a prophet, that they have that prophetic prerogative, to speak for that when they speak, they're speaking for God. Right? So when Ananias and Sapphira come in front of St. Peter, and they say, "Oh, we sold some property, we'd like to give the money to the church," and he says, "Is this all the money?" Right? And they say, "Yep," and it's not. Right? And they drop dead. He says, "You didn't lie to a man, you lied to God." Right? Because St. Peter is an apostle, has this role in relation to God. And we're gonna see other connections too. For example, we're going to see that the prophets, the individual prophets, experience what's usually called a prophetic call. They have some experience. Sometimes it's described very bare bones. The word of the Lord came to. So it's said, do this. Right? Sometimes we get a lot more detail. For example, when we get to the book of Isaiah, Isaiah is taken up into heaven and has this huge vision of God's royal court in heaven, worshiping Him. Right? But this prophetic call is again a lot of what St. Paul is talking about in a couple years when we get to St. Paul, when he's talking about what happened to him on the road to Damascus. He's talking about it as a prophetic call. He's saying, look, this happened. I saw Jesus, right? I had this experience, and that's what makes me a legitimate apostle, a legitimate representative of God. So we'll see that as we go through the prophets, we'll see a lot of these images repeat. This idea of a calling, and a couple more that I'm going to talk about now. So in addition to that calling, another theme we're going to see is a lot of what they're going to talk about is the day of the Lord. And we've touched on this a little bit because it's already come up already in a few books, especially the wisdom literature we've been reading. But the idea that there's a day of the Lord coming when God is going to visit His people. And we've talked before about how this isn't like a visit from Uncle Joe. Right? Hey, it's Uncle Joe! Right? Everybody, because this is more like wait till your father gets home. Right? Because when God comes to visit, some stuff is going to get straightened out. right? Some stuff that's out of whack is going to get put right, okay? And so, from the perspective of Israel, right, they were always looking forward to the day of the Lord, because in their minds, God was going to show up and kick the butts of all these nasty people who had been oppressing them, right? God's going to show up and he's going to take out the Edomites and the Moabites and the Syrians and the Babylonians and all these people we hate, and the Romans, right? And a lot of what the prophets are going to come and say is, yeah, he's going to do that, and then he's coming for you. Right? And then they go, wait a minute. Right? That's not right. We're the good guys, right? And so they have to call that into question. And so this theme of the day of the Lord, one thing we're going to notice in the prophets, and this is going to be true into the New Testament too, is that it refers both to what we call the eschatological, or the ultimate day of judgment. Right? When from our perspective now, we know when Christ will return, and it'll be the last judgment. But it also refers to times when that judgment comes upon people in the here and now. Because, for example, Sodom and Gomorrah didn't get to wait until the last day of judgment. Their judgment came upon them when they weren't looking. Right? And so, when the Assyrians are coming and besieging Israel, right, the prophets are going to come to Israel and say, the day of the Lord is coming. Maybe not for everybody, but it's coming for you. Right? This is D-Day for you. Right? Now is the day where you're going to have to decide. Now you need to repent now, or it's over for you. You're not going to get to see the other one. Right? And then the same thing for Babylon and Jerusalem. Right? So what will happen is they'll talk about in the same breath sort of that ultimate judgment and what's about to physically happen right now. And for example, in Matthew 23, Jesus does this. He talks about the ultimate day of judgment. He also talks about 70 AD when the Romans are going to come in and destroy the temple and wipe out Jerusalem. Right? Because for the people talking to him, that was when judgment was coming for them. Right? Soon. So those two will be talked about sort of together. Right. Let me see, is there anything else I wanted to talk about before we start Hosea? One last note. In addition to, we think about prophets primarily as speaking, right? They speak for God, but there's also a whole class, and we're going to see this right off the bat in Hosea, of prophetic actions, where God will tell them to do something as sort of an object lesson or a visual aid or a display. And some of these will be pretty wild. Right? Ezekiel's going to run around naked. Right? For a while, you're going to have people walking around in chains, come walking through the city in chains. Hosea, we'll see when we get into the first couple of verses, God's going to say to him, I want you to go and marry a whore. What? Right? But that's what he's going to do. So they're going to also take actions that are going to reveal to have the point of acting sort of like a parable, like acting out a parable in front of them to try to explain to them what's happening. Okay. So final note about prophets is, do we have any anymore? Right? Well, when we get to Joel, which we won't tonight, but in the next couple of weeks we will, Joel is going to prophesy that there's a day coming, right, when all flesh will receive the Holy Spirit, receive the Spirit of God, and all will prophesy. And this is something that was already predicted way back in Numbers. There's a time where Moses took some of the elders with him to the mountain, and they received the Holy Spirit, and they began to prophesy. And some of them prophesied in the camp, remember, and some people got jealous, so they went to Moses and said, hey, you need to tell them to stop prophesying in the camp, because you're the prophet. And he said, would that everyone could have the Spirit of God and could prophesy. Right? So there is a sense still in which, of course, obviously the apostles were special. Right? And we're the apostles. But there is another sense in which all of us who have the Holy Spirit dwelling within us, right, are able to do what the prophets did. Right? Now remember, what was it that the prophets did? Well, as they put it about St. John the Forerunner, St. John the Baptist, who we say was the ultimate of the prophets, he called the hearts of sons back to their fathers. What does that mean? Back in Deuteronomy. Fathers were supposed to teach their sons everything that God taught them. It's supposed to be handed down from generation to generation. Well, the prophet calls them back. Back to the faith of their fathers. Right? Back to the God of their fathers. So every one of us who has the Holy Spirit has that commission to call the people around us back to, hey, this is the way we're supposed to be living. Right? This is the way we're supposed to live life. This is what is right. And that's really what ultimately preaching is today, or should be. Right? Should be. It should be somebody coming with new revelations. Right? Should be somebody trying to predict the future. It should be calling us back to, hey, this is who we are. This is who Christ is. This is who God is. And this is how we need to be living our lives because of that. So, yes, there are still prophets today, and they should be us. They should be us. We'll also see, I mentioned back when we were reading the stories of Elijah and Elisha, remember there was this sort of community of prophets? So they went to the prophets. They were living by the river. And I talked at that time how the prophets, for the most part, and there are always exceptions, but for the most part lived something similar to what we have in monasticism today. Right? They lived apart from society, separate from society, usually a community, but you have prophets like Elijah, who was basically a hermit, and he went out and lived by himself. But they lived separate from society, and part of living separate from society was that they were able to maintain this purity of how they lived so that they could then come back to the society and say, hey, you're not living the way you're supposed to be. Whereas those of us who live in society and in culture get so wrapped up in it that a lot of times we can't see. That sort of some of our basic ideas need to be called into question. So, last note before we get into Hosea, because it's tied into that. The prophets are very unpopular people during their own lives.
You didn't have to
Right. As Christ points out, a prophet is without honor in his own country. Right. And Christ is always talking to the Pharisees. You're just like your fathers who murdered the prophets, right? Who came before you. Isaiah gets put in a hollow log and sawn in half. Other people. Jeremiah gets thrown down an empty well. Right? There's a lot of. They aren't beloved. Well, we have to, and as we go through, we'll try and tap into this. We have to think about, how we react a lot of times to prophetic voices in our own communities. Right? If we were having a 4th of July celebration, right? And let's say this is an example more akin to Amos. We'll probably get into next week. And somebody got up and started out and they denounced Russia. They talked about all the horrible things Putin does. Right? They'll be like, yeah, you tell them. Right? And then they start denouncing, the royal family of Saudi Arabia. And we're like, yeah, you tell them. And then all of a sudden they start tearing into France. I'm like, France? Well, yeah, I don't like the French. Okay, yeah. Okay. And then they start tearing into Canada. Wait a second. And then all of a sudden they start attacking the United States. Right. They start talking about financial corruption. They start talking about, millions of abortions. They start talking about, right? And they start saying, you Americans all claim to be Christians, but what about all this stuff? Right? What about all this stuff? Do you think he'd get a lot of cheers at the 4th of July celebration? Right? Do you think a lot of people would be like, all right, we're with you, right? I doubt it. Right? I doubt it. So, or even a non-political example, if someone all of a sudden burst into our church in the middle of a service, right, and started pointing at us and pointing out our sins. Real popular? No. No. See, because our natural sinful reaction to that, remember we talked about this in the Psalms of the Wisdom literature. We like people who tell us things we like to hear. Right? And we hate people who tell us things we don't want to hear. When in reality, a lot of the things we don't want to hear are actually the things we need to hear. Right? Are actually the things that if we took them seriously could end up saving us if we repent. Okay, so the prophets are going to be charged with very unpopular, in some cases, a death sentence of omission. Right? From their perspective. And so, especially when in a couple of weeks we get to Jonah, right? And God says, Jonah, I want you to go to Nineveh. We'll talk about the Assyrians again. That was their capital. That's sort of like if 1943, if God said to you, I want you to go to Berlin. I want you to stand up and tell Hitler that if he doesn't repent, God's going to wipe him out. Right? And then Jonah gets up and runs in the other direction. We'll understand why. That's a bad idea, God. Right? That's a really bad idea. Okay. This isn't going to go anywhere.
So he gets swallowed up by a whale trying to flee Hawaii.
You're right. Well, we're gonna, but so we'll get there. So we got to remember. None of these guys is going to be hailed as a hero during their life. Now we look back at them and we have the icons and their saints and everything. But at the time, nobody liked them.
Question, and when you mentioned Berlin, what about the gentleman by the name of Bonhoeffer,
Yeah,
who wrote the book The Cost of Discipleship? He fought,
which is a good book. Yeah,
and he fought the girl all the way through.
and gave his life for it. Yeah,
Well, yeah, he was executed.
yeah.
Would he be considered a modern day prophet of what was required?
I would say he had a prophetic ministry. Yeah,
But he called the people back
yeah,
to
Yeah. yeah. I would say Martin Luther King Jr. did too.
Yes.
So,
Thank you.
and you can see how things ended up for him as well. Okay, so we're going to start out with Hosea. Hosea is the first book in what's known typically as the Book of the 12. It's called the Book of the 12 because it's 12 really short prophetic books. And they're all on one scroll. If you have them in the original Hebrew, because they're so short, they're all on one giant scroll. That's mostly where the books come from. So for example, the reason the Torah is called the Pentateuch, the 5 books of Moses, is because it fills up 5 scrolls. And those Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, it's really all sort of continuous, but it still takes up 5 scrolls. These 12 little books take up 1 scroll. Okay. And they've been traditionally grouped together. I like the Book of the 12 better than what they're commonly called in English, which is the Minor Prophets. That just seems crummy to me. It's like what they call St. James the Lesser. Come on. I mean, that's not fair. So minor only in the length of their books, right? Compared to, say, Isaiah or Jeremiah, which we're going to see are much longer books.
Is there any parallel between the book of the 12 and the 12 apostles?
Not that I've found, but pay attention while we're looking at it. Maybe the 12 apostles seems to be more closely related to the 12 tribes of Israel, but there may be some. Okay, so Hosea. Now the other thing is, these books, as we go through them, we're going to be jumping around in time. Because remember, we read the historical books, and a lot of times these prophets were mentioned as we were going through, but these are now their writings. So they're not necessarily in order historically. So I'm going to give each one I'll give a little minute as when we're talking about. So Hosea is around 750 BC. Jeroboam II was king of Israel, the northern kingdom. Right? This is when we still have both northern kingdom of Israel and the southern kingdom of Judah. Okay. Hosea is in the northern kingdom, giving his prophecies. Remember, the northern kingdom was started by Jeroboam I, Jeroboam son of Nebat, who promptly, after God told him that if he obeyed everything God commanded, he'd give him an eternal dynasty like David, he promptly set up golden calves at Bethel and Dan and started worshiping idols. So the northern kingdom of Israel doesn't really ever have a good king. Okay. So sort of from front to back, from the very beginning to the end when the Assyrians destroy them, there's not a good king in terms of God's perspective. But God sends them prophets anyway. Right? He doesn't just cut them loose, he sends them prophets anyway. Remember, they're 10 and a half tribes out of the 12 tribes. Okay? And so, politically, at this point in history, Israel is about as big as Israel ever got. Territory-wise. Okay? Territory-wise. They just had a bunch of wars against the Syrians led by Ben-Hadad out of Damascus. And they won territory in them. So politically they're doing well. Economically they're doing really well. Lots of idolatry going on. Lots of partying. Lots of pagan religion. Okay, from their perspective everything's going great. God sends Hosea to tell them just the opposite. Just the opposite is true. And Hosea, or it's Hosea, his name means salvation. Salvation. It's part of the name Joshua, remember, is based on Jehoshua, which is Yahweh saves. This is his name means just sort of salvation in general. So Hosea chapter 1 verse 1. The word of the Lord that came to Hosea, the son of Beeri, in the days of Uzziah, Jotham, Ahaz, and Hezekiah, kings of Judah, and in the days of Jeroboam, son of Joash, king of Israel. The beginning of the word of the Lord to Hosea. The Lord said to Hosea, "Go, take to yourself a wife of fornication and children of fornication, for the land will surely go a-whoring by departing from the Lord." So that's how he starts off.
In the notes, in the study Bible for verse 1, what does that mean, theophor?
That's who the quote's from. That's from one of the church fathers.
That's the church father?
Yeah.
Is
Irenaeus.
Irenaeus. Yeah, same thing. Yeah. Yeah. Which is which. Yeah. Okay. So, this is where God starts. Right? Old King James Version was, "Go take for thyself a whore for a wife." Right? So, this is pretty blatant. This is what he's going to communicate first. Because, why? Because Israel has gone a-whoring. Not Israel has gone around sleeping with prostitutes. Israel has gone out and become a prostitute. Okay, is what he's saying. Okay. So, my people, this land that I made my covenant with, that I said, I'll be your God, you'll be my people, right? He's using the image of a marriage. I'm the husband, they're the wife. I connected myself to them, and now they've gone off with Baal and Asherah and with their other gods, with their politics, with their money, right? They've gone off with everybody who walked by. Verse 3, so he went and took Gomer, good biblical name if you have a daughter, not used a lot. Took Gomer, daughter of Diblaim, and she conceived and bore him a son. Okay, so he goes and he does it. Right? He goes and he finds a prostitute and he marries her. Okay. Marries her. She has a son. Verse 4, again the Lord said to him, call his name Jezreel. For in a little while I will avenge the blood of Jezreel on the house of Jehu, and I will make to cease the kingship of the house of Israel. It shall be in that day that I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. Remember, Jezreel is where Jehu went and slaughtered anybody who was related to Ahab in any way. Remember, men, women, children. He just slaughtered the entire royal family. So he's saying, name your first son Jezreel, because that's where I'm going to come and wipe out. Take vengeance for Jehu. Right. Oh, that's not bad yet. Verse 6, then she conceived again and bore a daughter. So God said to him, call her name Lo-Ruhamah. Lo-Ruhamah means no mercy. Okay. So he has a daughter. Name your daughter No Mercy, for I will no longer have mercy on the house of Israel, but will surely set myself in array against them. But I will have mercy on the house of Judah, and will save them by the Lord their God. I will not save them with bow, nor with sword, nor by war, nor by chariots, nor by horses or horsemen. Okay. So name your daughter No Mercy, so I'm going to have no mercy on Israel, but I am on Judah. Verse 8, now after she weaned Lo-Ruhamah, she conceived again and bore a son. So the Lord said, call his name Lo-Ami. Lo-Ami means not my people. For you are not my people, and I am not your God. So that's a divorce. Right? That's a divorce decree. Okay. So the prophet goes and does all these things in public. In public. So when these names are given, right, he's going to the priests, right? Like when we church a baby, going and dedicating these children. What's the little girl's name? No Mercy. Why is that? Because God is going to have no mercy on you when he comes. Okay, so these are public pronouncements. Okay, public pronouncements. Verse 10, yet the number of the children of Israel shall be as the sand of the sea, which shall not be measured or numbered. Then it shall come to pass in the place where it was said to them, you are not my people, even then they shall be called the sons of the living God. The children of Judah and the children of Israel shall be gathered together. They shall appoint themselves one head, and come up out of the land, for great shall be the day of Jezreel. Now notice how it turns. Even as he's announcing this judgment coming, he's saying, but in the future there's going to be mercy. Right? The day of Jezreel, remember, he's referring back to that reckoning. So this is a reference to the day of the Lord. Right? So even though there's going to be this reckoning and there's going to be this judgment in the future, right? In the future, there's going to be hope. Chapter 2, say to your brother, my people, and to your sister, pitied. Plead with your mother, plead, for she is not my wife, and I am not her husband. I will remove her fornication out of my presence and her adultery from between her breasts, that I may strip her naked and make her again as she was at the day of her birth. I will make her desolate and as a dry land, and I will kill her with thirst. What's that referring back to? Well, that's where did Israel come from?
The desert.
Right. There was no Israel.
There was no Israel.
Right? And it was a group of people who he led through the desert of Sinai. Right? The water they had was the water he gave them. The food they had was the food he gave them. Right? Now they've become wealthy. Now they've become prosperous. Now they've become successful, and they've forgotten about him. Right? So he says, I'll take you right back to where I found you. Right? Maybe then you'll remember. Verse 4, I will not have mercy upon her children, for they are children of fornication. For their mother went a-whoring, she that bore them disgraced herself. For she said, I will go after my lovers, who give me my bread and my water, and my garments and my linen clothes, my oil and my necessities. Right. So, rather than right? Trusting in God, who brought them there, who gave them the land, who created Israel, right, to take care of them. Who are they trusting after to get all these things they want? Well, they're going and they're having sex with the temple prostitutes of Asherah to make sure they'll have fertile fields. They're going and sacrificing their children to Molech to make sure that they'll have more children. They're going and making trade deals with pagans, right? Marrying off their sons and daughters, these pagan families with pagan worship and not caring, right? In order to get money and wealth and power and alliances, right? And so he says, you think they're the ones who are making you prosperous. You think they're the ones who are making you successful. Well, we'll see. Verse 6, therefore, behold, I will hedge up her way with thorns. I will stop the ways so she shall not find her path. She will follow after her lovers, but not overtake them. She will seek them, but not find them. She will say, I will go and return to my former husband, for it was better for me than now. For she did not know I gave her corn, wine, and oil, and multiplied silver to her. But she turned the silver and gold over to Baal. Therefore I will take back my corn in its season, and my wine in its time. I will remove my raiment and my linen clothes, that she may not cover her nakedness. Now I will expose her uncleanness before her lovers, and no one shall by any means deliver her out of my hand. I will take away all her gladness, her feasts, and her festivals at the new moon, and her Sabbaths, and all her solemn assemblies. I will destroy her vines and her fig trees, and all things of which she said, these are my wages that my lovers have given me. But I will make them a testimony, and the wild beasts of the field, the birds of the sky, and the reptiles of the earth shall devour them. I will repay her for the days of Baalim, wherein she sacrificed to them, and put on her earrings and her necklaces, and went after her lovers, but she forgot me, says the Lord. So again, apparently you have all this prosperity, and instead of giving gratitude and thanksgiving to me for it, you're thinking these other people, well, maybe if I take it away, you'll remember me then. Verse 14, therefore, behold, I will lead her astray and make her as desolate, and I will speak to her heart. I will give her possessions from there, in the valley of Achor, to open her understanding. She will be humbled there according to the days of her infancy, and according to the days of her coming up out of the land of Egypt. When I found you, you guys were slaves. Right? I brought you here, I gave you all this. I'm going to send you back into slavery. Right? And then, maybe when you remember, I'll bring you back again, and we'll see if things go differently this time. Then it shall come to pass in that day, says the Lord, that she will call me my husband, and shall no longer call me Baalim. For I will take away the names of Baalim out of her mouth. Baalim is the plural of Baal. And as we said before, Baal or Baal means Lord. So this is just a reference to all of those Canaanite gods. And their names shall be remembered no more. In that day I will make a covenant for them with the wild beasts of the field, and with the birds of the sky, and with the reptiles of the earth. I will break the bow, the sword, and the battle from off the earth, and will cause them to dwell safely. I will betroth you to myself forever. Yes, I will betroth you to myself in righteousness and justice, and in mercy and compassions. I will betroth you to myself in faithfulness, and you shall know the Lord. It shall come to pass in that day, says the Lord, that I will listen to heaven, and it shall listen to the earth. The earth shall listen to the corn and the wine and the oil, and they shall listen to Jezreel. And I will sow her to myself on the earth, and will love her that was not loved, and will say to that which was not my people, you are my people. And they shall say, you are the Lord my God. Yeah.
Why do they keep referring to her? Like, who's her?
Her is Israel.
Israel.
Because this whole metaphor is that God married Israel, and then Israel went off and cheated with every man she could find, basically. Right? And so he's saying, now I'm going to cut her off. Right? And then when the good times are over, maybe she'll come back and say, oh, I remember my husband and how well he treated me, I should go back to him. Right? That's sort of the metaphor that's being used. Right? But so note here that the pattern that we're seeing, he's talking about this exile. You're going to go back into slavery. Then you come out of exile, he's going to recreate Israel. Right? There's going to be a new people. There's going to be a new people. A new people of God. Chapter 3, Then the Lord said to me, Go yet again, and love a woman that loves evil things, an adulteress, even as the Lord loves the children of Israel. For they look after strange gods and love raisin cakes. Do not eat raisin cakes. These raisin cakes are grain offerings that were made to the Baals. Those raisin cakes are referring to. So it's not saying don't have a raisin bagel or you're going to. Right. This is the grain offering. Right. We talked about before how, in the sacrificial system that God prescribes in Leviticus, the Israelites take the best parts of the animal and offer those to God. We also talked about how in most pagan religions it's the exact opposite. For example, the Greeks even were sarcastic about it and referred to their sacrifices as the burning of the bones, because they went and sold all the leather and all the meat and everything and just burned the parts they didn't want, offered those to the gods. Same kind of thing here, right? You bring your grain offering, instead of bringing it to God, who you're supposed to bring your first fruits to when your harvest comes, you go and you bring it to Baal, and they make these cakes out of it and have this little feast. Right? So you get to have your raisin cake and eat it too.
Is that where the same comes from?
No.
Have your cake and eat it too.
So that's why for they look after strange gods and love raisin cakes. That's what that's talking about. They love going to these feasts. They love these celebrations of these pagan gods. Right.
I wanted to get to the point on two issues. When you look at, he bought her for 15 pieces.
Well, let me get there first. Okay. So verse 2, So I bought her for myself for 15 pieces of silver, a homer of barley, and a jar of wine. Okay.
Does this add up to 30 pieces of silver?
With what?
Barley and wine, the other half.
15 pieces of silver is the price for a slave.
Can I?
So the image here is that he's buying, essentially in our modern terms, he's buying her from her pimp. She's a prostitute.
This is talking literally about his wife, or
This is his wife. Well, this is his wife, literally, but it's a picture of Israel. So he says, go and get her out of prostitution now, is what he's saying. The verse he said, marry the prostitute. Now he's saying, go and get her out of prostitution. As a prostitute, she's a slave. She has an owner, who's essentially her pimp. And so in order to get her out of prostitution, he has to redeem her. Sort of like we saw in the book of Ruth, right? He has to go and redeem her. He has to go and pay the price to buy her out of slavery.
The thing as I understand this, when Hosea comes to buy her out of slavery, it comes to 30 pieces of silver, which was the highest that you could pay for a slave. And I don't know why that sticks in my mind, but in my research, when I looked up the 30 pieces of silver, that's why Jesus, that price came on.
Oh, well, we'll see that later in Jeremiah. Telling you. We'll get there.
I'll be good.
We'll get there. Okay. Verse 3, I said to her, you shall stay with me for many days. You shall not commit fornication, neither shall you be for another man, but I will be for you. For the children of Israel shall abide many days without a king, without a prince, without a sacrifice, without an altar, without a priesthood, and without symbols of revelation. Afterward the children of Israel shall return and seek the Lord their God and David their king, and they shall be amazed at the Lord and at his good things in the latter days. So he comes, he buys her out of slavery. Why? To symbolize that God is going to redeem Israel. Right? That the day is going to come. There's going to be a long time where they're not going to have
Nothing.
all these things. No king, no country, no altar, no sacrifices, no celebrations at all. Right? But at the time will come they'll return to who? David their king, or his descendant. Right? Which of course we would say is Christ. And you'll be amazed at the Lord and at the good things in the latter days. Chapter 4, hear the word of the Lord, you children of Israel, for the Lord has a judgment for the inhabitants of the land. There is no truth or mercy or knowledge of God in the land. Cursing and lying, murder and theft, and adultery gushed forth in the land, and blood is mingled with blood. Therefore the land shall mourn and be diminished with all the things that dwell in it. The wild beasts of the field, the reptiles of the earth, and the birds of the sky, and the fish of the sea shall come to an end. So notice this emphasis on blood. Remember, going all the way back to Cain and Abel. Right? Abel's blood called out of the ground to God for vengeance. And back when in Exodus, when we were reading the law, there were all the rules, right? What you could eat, what was clean, what was unclean. And then there's a very short list of rules, of laws, that had to be followed by aliens, right? By strangers. So your Moabite friend comes to work your fields, right? He's not converting. He doesn't have to follow all the laws. Right? Doesn't have to follow all the laws, but there are certain things he cannot do. Right? And the reason he cannot do them is that if he does them, it pollutes the land. And God says the land will vomit you out if you pollute the land with these things. Okay? And those things are bloodshed, right? Bloodshed, the eating of blood, sexual immorality, and the worship of idols. Those are the 4 things you're not allowed to do. Right? That no one is allowed to do. Beyond just the Torah, if you do those things, land spits you out. That list, you may remember that list because it shows up again in the book of Acts. Shows up again in the book of Acts. In the book of Acts, when they're trying to decide, when these Gentiles become Christians, do they have to follow the whole law? The answer is no, but no eating blood, no eating meat offered to idols, no idolatry, no sexual immorality, right? And obviously no murder, bloodshed, right? Same list, because those things pollute the ground. Going even further forward in history, in the history of the Orthodox Church, when we get to the 6th century A.D., Justinian is the emperor of the eastern half of the Roman Empire, the Byzantine Empire. And he puts together for the first time what's called a nomocanon. Right? At this point, the empire's been Christian long enough. He's got the canon law of the church, right? And as the emperor, he's responsible for the laws of the country. Right? So he has to decide, do I make everyone in the Byzantine Empire follow all the rules of the church? Right? Do I shut down all the taverns? Do I shut down all the spectacles? And what he does is, he goes back to that list. Right? He says, the church, we'll have confession, we'll have repentance, we'll have, right, people go to confession, that's the rules of the church who are Christians, but everyone is going to refrain from idolatry, refrain from sexual immorality, refrain from bloodshed, right? Refrain from eating and drinking blood. Those are the things that he makes illegal for everyone. Right? And that becomes the basis of the civil law. Okay? So, drinking blood?
Yes, a human or a mammal.
Both.
Well, I know some people that make blood.
Oh, I eat rare meat all the time. I violate that all the time. Oh yeah, blood sausage in Germany.
Yeah.
So we're not bound by that anymore.
Well.
We got a priest on this opinion.
Yeah. It's one of those things, like usury, lending money at interest. Still a sin, really, but
It looked like,
Kind of hard to get around. Yeah, we have a big disconnect. We have a big disconnect on blood with the way they saw it in the ancient world. It was only with warm-blooded animals too. Like you could cook a fish and eat the fish. You didn't have to, a fish is still kosher. You don't have to drain the blood out of a fish.
Yeah.
It's not hot-blooded. But warm-blooded animals, going all the way back to, in Genesis before Noah, there was a prohibition against eating them and killing them at all. And then after the flood, we saw God gave permission to eat some of them, but not their blood. Blood drinking and eating blood was connected to a lot of pagan rites, which is part of it. But also the connection that's brought in the Old Testament is that the blood of the blood of an animal is its life. That warm blood is its life.
Just like it's our life.
Just like it's our life.
Our life.
Right. And so you get these statements that we've seen in the Old Testament, we're seeing in the prophet, where God is going to demand an account for every drop of blood spilled by every human being and every creature. And every creature. There's a reason why our monastics are basically vegetarians or pescatarians. They don't eat red meat. There's a reason why we don't eat it during fast periods. It's the idea that we prey upon other living things to continue our own existence. Right? That image isn't a positive one in the scriptures. Isn't a positive one in the scriptures. The big, huge exception, of course, being the Eucharist, where we drink Christ's blood, which flips that whole thing on its head. But the imagery there is that by drinking Christ's blood, right, that blood is his life. And so he's offering his blood, he's offering his life to us. Right? We're partaking of his eternal life. Right? He's sharing it with us. That's the imagery there. But see, with an animal, especially with another human being, but even with an animal, you're taking its life in order to feed yourself, in order to continue your own. And there's something there that, while I wouldn't say, and like I said, I eat rare meat, while I wouldn't say it's a sin to eat things butchered the way we do, there is something better about, for example, the monastic diet, where they don't do that. Right? Where they're not going out and taking the lives of God's creatures in order to sustain their own. Right? Where they're primarily eating vegetables, and then on big feast days, fish. And Adam and Eve were vegetarians.
Yeah, but they got thrown out.
Yeah, but then in the New Testament, with the sheep.
Well, yeah, right. That's what I'm saying. I'm not going to say it's a sin.
Yeah.
We're not going to say it's a sin. But there is something about that diet that is a positive thing, which is why our monastics practice it. Right? A lot of our monastics fish. I don't know any that hunt. They go and shoot deer, or go and,
I do.
Monastics?
No,
I'm talking about monks. Yeah, well, yeah. So, like I said, there's I wouldn't necessarily, again, say it's a sin, but there's sort of, in terms of if you're talking about a better or a higher, or however you want to talk about the monastic life, right? That dedication, I think there's a positive aspect to that. There's a positive aspect to not consuming blood.
Just as a suggest to this class that they see the movie God is Not Dead, which was to debate back and forth, is God real? And if you look at everything when they talk about the Bible, about this, particularly blood, the diseases that you can
Oh, yeah.
from them,
Yeah.
which to me would be a revelation that whoever wrote this must, at that particular time, be far superior and to give a factual
Yeah.
statement that yes, there is a God.
Well, and with not eating pork and, you know, you have to butcher a pig very carefully. Yeah. Yeah, so there's that. And we also have to take into account when I say, you know, where, here, let me fix that a second.
Good job.
When I say it's not necessarily a sin, remember St. Paul is going to say, when talking about, and we'll get there in a couple of years, St. Paul is, when he's talking about meat offered to idols, is going to say for some people eating meat offered to idols isn't a sin. Right? Depending on the context. Right? Depending on the context. But that he would, it falls into that, as Paul says, everything is permissible, not everything is beneficial. Right? We're allowed. Is it necessarily the best way of life, the best course of action? Not necessarily. Okay. But so, getting back to that list, so you see where Hosea starts here in chapter 4, when he comes to them about their sins, he's not going through the picayune stuff. Right? He's not saying, Bob had a ham sandwich last Tuesday. Right? And he's not saying, you know, that ephod wasn't 100% linen, right? That you wore. You had two kinds of fabrics, right? Or you planted two different crops in the same field. He's not going to these sort of abstruse rules somewhere in the Torah and saying, oh, you're not following all of God's picky rules, so you're in trouble, right? He's going to this basic stuff. Basic stuff, right? Adultery, murder, theft. Right. These are the things that are going on in Israel. Okay. There's things that there's no justifying. Right? Even the Gentiles know that these things are wrong. Verse 3, and we read in verse 3, therefore the land shall mourn. That's that image. You know, he warned the land will vomit you out. Right? That these sins are so basic and so severe that they affect the land around you. They affect the way you relate to animals. They affect the whole creation in a negative way. Verse 4, that neither may anyone judge nor analyze another, but my people are as a priest who is spoken against. Thus you shall be weak by day, and the prophet shall be weak with you. I have compared your mother to the night. My people are like as those who have no knowledge, because you have rejected knowledge. I will also reject you from being a priest to me. And because you have forgotten the law of your God, I also will forget your children. So he's saying, you know, he picked Israel to serve this purpose. Right? To serve as, remember, for the other nations. He's supposed to lead the other nations into worshiping God, to sort of act as their priest. Right? Well, somewhere along the line, they forgot. Right? They have no knowledge. Why? Because God didn't give it to them? No, God gave it to them. Right? Them of all the people on the earth, God gave knowledge to. But they rejected it. They made the choice to reject it. So since they rejected Him and forgot Him, He's now going to reject them and forget them for a time. Verse 7, according to their multitude, so they sinned against me. I will turn their glory into dishonor. They will eat the sins of my people and take away their lives because of their wrongdoings. The priest shall also be as the people, so I will punish him for his ways and repay him for his counsels. They shall eat and not be satisfied. They have gone a-whoring and shall by no means prosper, because they have abandoned holding fast to the Lord. The heart of my people was gladly engaged in fornication, wine, and strong drink. They asked counsel by means of signs, and they reported answers to them by their staves. They've gone astray in a spirit of whoredom and grievously gone a-whoring from their God. Okay. So, this fornication, wine, and strong drink is part of the worship of these pagan gods, right? So they go and participate in these pagan celebrations, and then when they want to know the future, when they want to know what they should do, when they want to know how they should live their lives, they go straight to their local seer who will use their staff, or right, who will give them some signs, and they follow them. Verse 13, they have sacrificed on the tops of the mountains, and on the hills they have sacrificed under the oak and poplar and under the shady tree, because their shade was good. Therefore your daughters shall go a-whoring, and your daughters-in-law shall commit adultery. But I will not show care for your daughters when they commit fornication, nor your daughters-in-law when they commit adultery. For they mingled themselves with harlots and sacrificed with the initiated ones. And the people who understood entangled themselves with a harlot. But you, O Israel, be not ignorant. And do not go, men of Judah, to Gilgal. Do not go up to Beth-aven, nor swear by the living Lord. What do you say there? Gilgal, Beth-aven, these are pagan shrines. Right? These are places where there are pagan shrines.
Now he's saying men of Judah.
Yeah, both. O Israel, be not ignorant. Judah, do not go to Gilgal. Judah has the temple. Right? They have even less excuse. Do not go to Beth-aven. Do not go to Gilgal. This, nor swear by the living Lord. Lord L shouldn't be capitalized there. It's actually great. The living Lord he's talking about is one of the Baals.
Would that also mean do not take an oath using the word of the Lord?
Well, they're saying do not swear by this other.
But also do not take an oath, because let your yes be yes, pardon us.
Well, yeah. That's included there, but they're taking oaths by these pagan. They're basically, what that's talking about is they're sealing all their business arrangements with these pagan invocations. Verse 16, for Israel was maddened like a mad heifer. Now the Lord will feed them like a lamb in a wide place. Ephraim, joined with idols, has laid stumbling blocks in his own way. He has chosen the Canaanites. They have grievously gone a-whoring. They have loved dishonor through her rudeness. You are a blast of wind in her wings, and they shall be ashamed because of their altars. And notice they've chosen the Canaanites. Right? How does that make sense? Remember the Canaanites who got wiped out by them? These gods didn't do so well for the Canaanites. Right? They didn't do so, but now they've decided to side with the Canaanites instead of with the Lord who brought them there. Chapter 5, hear these things, O priests, and attend, O house of Israel. Listen, O house of the king, for judgment is with you, because you have been a snare in Mizpah and a net spread on Tabor, which they that hunt the prey have fixed, but I will be your instructor. I know Ephraim, and Israel is not far from me, for now Ephraim has gone grievously a-whoring, and Israel is defiled. Their deliberations did not allow them to return to their God, for a spirit of fornication is in them, and they have not gotten to know the Lord. The arrogance of Israel shall be brought low before his face, and Israel and Ephraim shall become weak due to their wrongdoings, and Judah also shall become weak with them. They shall go as sheep and calves diligently to seek the Lord, but they shall not find him, for he has withdrawn himself from them. For they have forsaken the Lord, because strange children have been born to them. Now the rust shall devour them along with their heritages. So he said that they'll go with sheep and calves, right? He's saying, I know what's going to happen. Right? I know what's going to happen. I know as soon as my judgment starts, as soon as you get the first inkling of my judgment, as soon as things stop going so well, all of a sudden, you're going to start showing up at the temple with all these sacrifices. All of a sudden, you're going to, oh, wait a second, right? We forgot. Right? Remember in Judges, this pattern over and over again. Right? So when we come in and oppress them, they cry out to the Lord, oh, we've sinned, we're sorry. We repent, and God would come and rescue them, and then they'd go right back to doing what they were doing before. Right? He's saying, I know what's coming. I'm going to start to send some judgment your way, and all of a sudden, you're going to show up with all these sacrifices, but you're going to be wasting your time. Right? Because I know what you're doing. And I'm not going to be there to receive those sacrifices. Blow the trumpet on the hills, sound aloud on the heights, proclaim in Beth-aven, Benjamin is confused. Ephraim has vanished in the days of reproof. Among the tribes of Israel I have shown faithful things. The princes of Judah became as those who removed the boundaries. I will pour out my fury upon them as water. Ephraim oppressed his adversary, he trod over judgment, for he began to go after vanities. Therefore I will be as a confusion to Ephraim and as a sting to the house of Judah. Ephraim saw his disease and Judah his pain. Then Ephraim went to the Assyrians and sent ambassadors to King Jareb. But he could not heal you, and your pain shall in no way cease from you. What's that talking about? He's talking about, well, the last time things started to go bad, you went and decided to make a deal with the Assyrians. Right? You went and go and made a deal with him like he's going to bail you out. Right? Well, he's not going to bail you out this time. Verse 14, wherefore I am as a panther to Ephraim and as a lion to the house of Judah. So I will grasp and go away, and I will take, and there shall be none to rescue. I will go and return to my place until they are destroyed. And then they shall seek my face. In their affliction they will seek me early. Saying, chapter 6, let us go and return to the Lord our God, for he has grasped and will heal us. He will smite and plug the wound with lint. After 2 days he will heal us, and the third day we shall rise and live before him. What do you think that might be a reference to? After 2 days he will heal us, and the third day, the resurrection of Christ. Let us know, let us pursue that we might know the Lord. We shall find him ready as the daybreak, and he will come to us, as the early and latter rain to the earth. What shall I do to you, O Ephraim? What shall I do to you, O Judah? Your mercy is as a morning cloud, and as the early dew that goes away. Therefore I have cut off your prophets, I have slain them with the words of my mouth, and my judgment shall go forth as the light. For I desire mercy and not sacrifice, and the knowledge of God more than whole burnt offerings. Right. So there he says it really plain. Right. Says it really plain. I desire mercy, not sacrifice. I don't want the rituals. It's going to get even more blunt later in the prophets, where he's going to say, those sacrifices you're offering, stop. Because it's an insult. Because I know your heart's not in it. I know you're just going through the motions.
What is that about? What is that if not telling the future? That passage about Christ.
Oh,
rising the third day. Just sometimes
yeah, I mean, that would it seemed to me to be obvious. There's this judgment that they get struck by God, and then on the third day they rise again or restored. Yeah, so here this, I desire mercy and not sacrifice. Right? He doesn't want going through the motions. It's always dangerous to say as a priest in the church. You're always worried attendance might go down if you tell people not to show up if they don't mean it. But don't just show up even if you don't mean it. But that's the truth. That's the truth. None of the rituals, none of the making the sign of the cross, none of the anything means anything if your heart isn't right before God.
So he's wanting to come in and get down on his knees and ask instead of killing the sheep.
And repent. And really repent.
And really repent instead of walking here and sticking the sheep. Okay, Lord, I stuck him.
Like it's this mechanical thing.
Yeah. Okay.
Right? I committed X sin. Right? So now I need to do Y. God's mad at me for doing X, so now if I do Y, he'll be happy with me again. It's not how it works.
So the deeper meaning of this is God is saying, I want a broken spirit, a contrite heart. That'd be the sacrifice.
Psalm 50, right.
And like you said, forget the ritual and the formality.
Right.
You yourself must be broken.
Well, no, not forget the ritual. Remember, at the end of Psalm 50, then will I offer bullets upon your heart.
That's Psalm 50.
Yeah, 51 in the King James.
51.
In the King James, yeah.
Thank you.
50 is the Septuagint. But yeah, then, right? He wants repentance first. He wants the real thing here first. And then you come and express it through worship. Right? Then you come and make your offerings. Then you come Like Christ says, you know, if you're going to bring your offering to the altar and you remember you have something against your brother, you go fix that first. Then you go to the altar. Right? Because without that, the altar doesn't mean anything. It's just a lie. Or as St. John says, if you could say you love God, but you hate your brother, you're a liar.
In practicality, as human beings, do we really ever do that? Of all of the sins and thought, word, and deed that we commit in a week, you know?
Well, we do that to the best of our ability. And then when we come forward to receive the Eucharist, we still say that he came into the world to save sinners, of whom I am chief.
Yes.
Even after, you know, we've prepared ourselves as best we can. We still say, I know that wasn't enough, really. Right? Or, you know, the holy things are for the holy. And we respond, one is holy, Jesus Christ. Verse 7, but they are as a man who transgresses the covenant. There they despise me. Gilead is a city working vanity with troubling water. We're in chapter 6, verse 8. Gilead is a city working vanity with troubling water. Your strength is that of a pirate. The priests have hidden the way. They have murdered the people of Shechem, for they have done lawlessness. Right? Your strength is that of a pirate, meaning it's stolen. Right? All this wealth and all these things you have, it's stolen. You didn't come by it, honestly. Right? And he's saying, this isn't just, this goes all the way up. Right? The priests, the people there who are supposed to be teaching people, right? The way, the two paths. Priests are supposed to be teaching people the way that leads to salvation, have hidden it. Instead of teaching it, they've hidden it. Because they're just as wicked as everyone else. Right? So they're hiding from the people the way that leads to salvation. Verse 10, in the house of Israel I have seen horrible things. There is the fornication of Ephraim. Israel and Judah are defiled. Begin to harvest for yourself when I return the captives of my people. When I have healed Israel, then shall the wrongdoing of Ephraim and the evil of Samaria be revealed. Remember, Samaria was the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. For they have worked falsehood. A thief shall come into him, even a robber taking spoil in his way, that they may sing together as men singing in their heart. Now remember all their evils. Now their own counsels have encircled them. They were before my face. They gladden kings with their evils and princes with their lies. They are all adulterers, like an oven heated for cooking, burning with a flame during the kneading of the dough until it is leavened. In the days of our kings, the princes began to be inflamed with wine. He stretched out his hand with pestilent fellows. Wherefore their hearts are inflamed like an oven while they were falling down all the night. Ephraim is satisfied with sleep. The morning is come, he is burnt up like a flame of fire. They are all heated like an oven and have devoured their judges. All their kings are fallen. There was not among them one that called upon me. Ephraim is mixed among his peoples. Ephraim became a cake not turned, meaning it burnt on the one side. Strangers devoured his strength, and he knew it not. Gray hairs came upon him, and he knew it not. The pride of Israel shall be humbled before his face, yet they have not returned to the Lord their God. Neither have they diligently sought him in spite of all this. Ephraim was like a silly dove, not having a heart. He called to Egypt, and they went to the Assyrians. Doves, I know this is a weird connotation. We sort of see doves with peace, with being a pretty bird. Doves in ancient Hebrew and Aramaic cultures were considered to be stupid. Doves. But doves were considered to be stupid birds. So when it says Ephraim was like a silly dove, that's what it's. They put the word silly there to try and get at that idea that for them, doves were considered to be stupid. So, and I think it's because they don't migrate the same way other birds do, but they are considered to be stupid. So this is a silly dove, doesn't know where to go, right? So Israel starts getting into trouble, and he doesn't know to go to God. He runs to Egypt for help. He runs to Assyria for help. Whenever they shall go, I will cast my net upon them. I will bring them down as the birds of the sky. I will chastise them through the news of their afflictions. Woe to them, for they have turned away from me. They are cowards, for they have committed impious deeds against me. Yet I redeemed them, but they spoke falsehoods against me. Their hearts did not cry aloud to me, but they wailed upon their beds. They slashed themselves for oil and wine. They were chastised by me. I strengthened their arms, but they devised evil against me. They turned aside to nothing. They became as a stretched bow. Their princes shall fall by the sword. They'll be despised in the land of Egypt because of their unrestrained tongue. So this idea in verse 14, their hearts did not cry aloud to me, but they wailed upon their beds. They did plenty of complaining, right, when God tried to bring some kind of discipline to them. Right? We talked about one of the ways that Israel and Judah were different than the other nations is God didn't wait for their cup of iniquity to fill up and then wipe them out. But he disciplined them along the way, right, to try to keep them in line. Well, despite that, that cup of iniquity is filling up, right? And so he's saying, look, I came and tried to discipline you. You went and complained a lot. You cried a lot. But you didn't cry to me. You didn't repent. You just complained. Right? You didn't change the way you were living. Chapter 8, he shall come into their midst like the land, like an eagle against the house of the Lord, because they broke my covenant and acted impiously against my law. They shall cry out to me, saying, O God, we know you. Right? He's saying again, I know what's coming. Right? All of a sudden when things go bad, they're going to say, oh God, remember us? We remember you. For Israel has turned away from good things. They have pursued an enemy. They made kings for themselves, but not by me. They have ruled, but they did not make it known to me. They made idols for themselves with their silver and gold, that they might be utterly destroyed. Get rid of your calf, O Samaria. My anger is kindled against them. How long will they be unable to purge themselves in Israel? A workman made it, and it is not God. Therefore your calf, O Samaria, was a deceiver. For they sowed wind-damaged seeds, and their destruction shall await them. A sheaf of corn cannot produce flour, and even if the seeds should produce it, strangers would devour it. Israel is swallowed up. Now he has become as a worthless vessel among the nations. For they have gone up to the Assyrians. Ephraim has sprouted again against himself. They loved gifts. Therefore they shall be handed over to the nations. Now I will receive them, and they will stop a while to anoint a king and princes. Because Ephraim has multiplied altars, his beloved altars have become sins to him. I will write a multitude of statutes for him, for his statutes are considered as strange things, as well as his beloved altars. For if they should offer a sacrifice and eat flesh, the Lord would not accept them. Now he will remember their wrongdoings and take vengeance for their sins on their sins. They have returned to Egypt, and they shall eat unclean things among the Assyrians. Israel has forgotten him who made him. They have built temples, and Judah has multiplied walled cities. But I will send fire upon his cities, and it shall devour their foundations. This is probably as good a place as any to stop for this week. So notice, I said a few weeks ago that the prophets are sort of half story and half pro wrestling. Because there's a lot of trash talk that goes on. But notice there's always, when it comes to Israel and Judah, not when it comes to some of the other nations, but when it comes to Israel and Judah, the judgment has a purpose. Right? The judgment is not just, oh, God's angry and he's going to smite some folks. Right? The judgment has a purpose. The judgment is coming so that they'll come back to God. So that they'll get back on this path that leads to salvation, that leads to eternal life with God. So this judgment for Israel and Judah is discipline. Right? It's there to educate. Right? It's with the purpose of ultimately redeeming them. That's why we always get, even as he's talking about destroying their cities and wiping out their land, then all of a sudden it turns right into a promise of, but I'll gather you back. Right? You'll return to David your king. On the third day, right, I'll raise you again. That promise is always there, right along with the judgment. They're not separated. That's something to watch as we go forward. Because again, these prophets are part of what gets quoted a lot by our friends who like to say Old Testament has angry, mean God, right? New Testament has nice, friendly God. And it's not, as we've seen already throughout the Old Testament, it's not the case. It's not the case of the prophets either. Right? This judgment, number one, always has a purpose. It's always directed against actual evil things that are going on, right? To make them stop and to save the people from them. Essentially save them from themselves. To save them from what they're doing to themselves. So, and we got the long introduction out of the way. So now I can just refer back to that in future. So thank you, everybody.